Hey friends, it's Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Rachel Terry and I'm the author of 3 young adult fantasy books. Information will be in the description box down below if you're interested. Today's video is going to be a recommendations video, and while I know I've talked about some of my favorite historical mysteries on this channel before, things have changed a little bit, and so I wanted to make this video both for people who might already love historical mysteries and might be looking for new ones that they've not yet tried or heard of, and for people who might be wanting to get into this genre but don't know where to start. So to start out with, I would like to begin with the series that got me into reading historical mystery, and that is the Bess Crawford series by Charles Todd. This takes place during World War I and follows Bess Crawford, who is a nurse tending to soldiers on the front lines. Through various different means, she becomes involved with these investigations, and this series follows her through the war, and currently the war has ended, at least as of the filming of this video, and this is a series that got me into reading historical mystery. It is not my favorite series, but I think it was the perfect introduction. It's written in first-person point of view, and Bess is an amateur sleuth. She's not a policeman or a private detective, so she doesn't really have very much authority to be investigating, and she gets herself into trouble sometimes by sticking her nose where she's not wanted. And then whenever you have a amateur sleuth character, it's always harder because they are limited by the lack of authority that they have to investigate, and then combined with a first-person point of view, you as the reader only know what Bess knows. But it was the perfect introduction to this genre, and my life and my writing both would not be the same without it. I read this book the first time in high school. The first book is called A Duty to the Dead, and my dad brought it to me and he was like, "Here, read this. What are you, afraid you'll like it or something?" It was one of those kind of challenge things. I'm not exactly sure how he phrased it, but I was like, well, maybe I will read it. And I did, and I didn't look back. So this is the series that got me into reading historical mystery. The second series is also by Charles Todd, and it is the Ian Rutledge mystery series. The first book is called A Test of Wills. This one is one of my favorite historical mystery series ever. It is set slightly after World War I and follows a police inspector named Ian Rutledge as he tries to pick up the pieces of his old life after returning to his job in the police after returning from the war. The war was a quite traumatic experience for him, to say the least, and it has left him quite changed. In the war, he was an officer, and if you know anything about World War I, you know that some of the tactics that were employed were not necessarily the best in terms of strategy or value of human life. And there were lots of instances where soldiers would take inches of ground only to cede it back to the enemy the very next day, and this constant getting nowhere, losing men all the time, was very poor for morale. And so when Rutledge's company is ordered to take a machine gun nest, there is rebellion among his men. One in particular, named Hamish McLeod, flat out refuses, and so Rutledge, as its commanding officer, is left with no choice but to execute him for failing to obey a direct order. He gives Hamish plenty of time to reconsider and change his mind, but the Scot will not be moved. So Rutledge is forced to execute his own soldier under his command, and as he does so, an artillery shell falls short, exploding nearby, killing the rest of Rutledge's men and burying him under layers of mud with Hamish's dead body. Hamish's body provides a small pocket of air which prevents Rutledge from suffocating to death until he is able to be rescued, but as you can imagine, this experience was very traumatic and left Rutledge with PTSD, which is not well understood back then and is referred to as shell shock. So not only is he trying to hide what was viewed as cowardice back then from people who know him, he doesn't want them to find out what this experience did to him and the effect that it has on him. He also hears Hamish's voice in his head. He hears the voice of the man he was forced to kill in his head, and Hamish throughout the series acts as both antagonist toward Rutledge but also a partner, if you will, in solving these crimes. This is a very interesting dynamic and one I've not seen explored before in the mystery genre, and I just absolutely love it. This series for the most part is written in third-person limited point of view, and I just really love Rutledge as a character. He's both very compassionate but also harsh when needed, and he doesn't deal with bull very well, and he just does what needs to be done. And I am looking forward to both more books in this series. At this point in time, I'm not sure if there's going to be any more because Charles Todd, the author, was actually a son and mother writing duo that wrote these books together under the son's name, Charles Todd. And unfortunately, Caroline Todd, the mother, has passed away, so it's unclear if there's going to be any more books or not. I do think there's going to be at least one in both series coming out, and then however the readers react to these books will determine whether there are any more moving forward if what I've read is true. But I would not let that deter you at all if you're thinking about reading these. There are lots of books in both series, but they are 100% worth it, and I'm sure there will be more books out by the time you catch up to where we are currently in the series. Next up, there are 2 series by Anne Perry that I'd like to talk about, and the first one is the Charlotte and Thomas Pitt mystery series. Talk about a long series, but it is completed. This is a very, very long series that I read over the course of like 4 years. I was not in any rush whatsoever, but this series takes place in the late Victorian era in London mainly, and follows mostly Charlotte and Thomas Pitt, who are married. They meet each other for the first time in the very first book, The Cater Street Hangman. Charlotte comes from a kind of well-off family, and of course Pitt, being a police inspector, he's not viewed as being very high on the social hierarchy at all. So her parents don't exactly approve of the match, but Charlotte ends up falling for him anyway. The 2 of them get married, and we follow their life and the lives of the side characters that you meet along the way throughout this very long series. They have children together. We meet characters like Charlotte's sister Emily, and Emily gets married to a man who has a great aunt named Vespasia, and she's just a great character as well. Part of what makes the series so good is the side characters, but whenever I would pick up the next book to read, it just felt like going back and spending time with old friends. The descriptions in this book are amazing and spot on, and I don't know how Anne Perry did it, honestly. It feels like she lived in the Victorian era, not when she actually lived. The amount of detail is very impressive. It's a very atmospheric type thing. These are slower paced mysteries, but it's more like characterization and getting a feel for the world, if you will. It's world building, but the historical mystery version of that. Some of the mysteries obviously I liked better than others. When you have a series, that's probably the case. You're going to like certain installments better than others. Some of them I absolutely really loved, and at some point I'm going to do a complete reread of this entire series. But in the meantime, I'm still working on finishing the second Anne Perry series that I want to recommend, and that is the William Monk mystery series. This takes place in the mid-Victorian era, I believe. It takes place earlier than the Charlotte and Thomas Pitt mysteries and follows William Monk, who is also a police detective. He has had an injury where he no longer remembers who he is, so he doesn't remember how to do his job. And that's a big problem when you're a police detective. He doesn't remember any of the contacts that he had, he doesn't remember any of the cases he worked on, and he doesn't even remember really how to go about investigating a case. Even more confusing, people don't seem to react to him very well whenever he sees them, and he kind of gets the feeling that before his accident he wasn't a very nice individual, and he wasn't, and so people are not very inclined to help him. They don't think very highly of him, and so he has to navigate this and figure out who he is or who he wants to be now, as well as trying to hide his amnesia from his boss and the people that he works with. And he also meets a nurse named Hester Latterly, who is a great character. The 2 of them absolutely hate each other at the beginning, but of course there is an enemies to lovers type subplot woven through this series. I haven't yet finished it because I'm reading it just as slowly as I read the first one. I'm really kind of trying to savor it, but I think it will be enjoyable, if not quite as good for me as the Charlotte and Thomas Pitt ones, because I just don't think I could love a Victorian mystery series quite as well as I love that. And I nearly forgot, there is actually a third Anne Perry mystery series I want to recommend, which is the Daniel Pitt mystery series. There's very few of these in comparison to the other 2, and this follows Daniel Pitt, who is the son of Charlotte and Thomas from the other series that I mentioned. This takes place in Edwardian England, and it follows Daniel as he works not as a policeman but a lawyer, and he's like a defense lawyer, so he gets involved in these cases and tries to find the truth. And there's not as many of these. Unfortunately, Anne Perry has also passed away, so unless she had some completed manuscripts that have not yet been published, it's unlikely that we're going to get any more books in these series. So I don't know if the Daniel Pitt series is actually finished, if it came to a satisfying conclusion or not, because I haven't finished reading that one yet either, but I do know that both the William Monk and the Charlotte and Thomas Pitt mysteries are finished. Next up, we have the Raven, Fisher, and Simpson mystery series by Ambrose Parry. This takes place in Edinburgh, Scotland, also during the Victorian era, and follows the 3 main characters, Dr. Will Raven, Sarah Fisher, and Dr. Simpson. Dr. Simpson was actually a real person. He helped create or discover the invention of chloroform as an anesthetic, and I believe that Will Raven is a fictional character who functions as his assistant in this series, and then Sarah Fisher is a housemaid who has aspirations of becoming a doctor in her own right, which is something that is obviously very difficult for women at that time. These are medical people, they're in the medical profession, but through various means they end up becoming involved in crimes and solving these mysteries. First book in this series is The Way of All Flesh. I keep meaning to tell you what the first book is. The first book in William Monk is The Face of a Stranger, and the first book in Daniel Pitt is 21 Days. But the first book in the Ambrose Parry mysteries is The Wheel of All Flesh. I actually was kind of bored, to be honest, reading this first book in the series. I felt like there wasn't much mystery to it, but then I realized that the entire book was basically building characterization and making the reader care about the characters, and boy did I ever. I really cared about these characters, and that's what kept me reading, and I have read every single one in this series up to this point, and I eagerly await the next one. Now we go on to Heresy by S.J. Paris. This is the first book in the Giordano Bruno series, and I do have to have a disclaimer. I've only read this first book so far. I've not read the other books in the series, but I fully intend to because I enjoyed it, so I feel kind of confident in throwing this in here as a recommendation as well. But this is definitely outside of my usual historical fiction wheelhouse regardless, much less mystery, because it takes place in Tudor England in the 1500s. And it follows Giordano Bruno, who was a real-life person. He used to be a monk, but he was excommunicated from the Catholic Church for having heretical beliefs, and in this book he is sent to Oxford University to try to ferret out secret papists, because at the time the whole Protestant versus Catholic conflict was in full swing, and it was just fascinating to read about. I don't believe that the real Giordano Bruno went around solving murders, but he does in this book series, and this is not something that I would usually pick up anyway, because I am not a big fan when authors take real-life people and put them into fictional situations, much less when they do it in first-person point of view, but this book did, and somehow it worked, and I really enjoyed it. And it's so different to read a book that's set in the 1500s instead of the 1800s, because so many of them do seem to be set in relatively the same time periods and same places. Next up, we have two series by Ashley Weaver. The first is the Amory Ames series, and the first book in that series is Murder at the Brightwell, I believe. This takes place in the 1930s and follows Amory Ames, a socialite who's well-to-do, and her husband Milo. These are not professional detectives or policemen, obviously. It's another amateur sleuth thing, and they get involved in various mysteries, and Amory starts meddling and ends up having to solve these cases with her husband Milo. I very much enjoyed the characterization in these. These are more cozy mysteries. I'm not personally a huge fan of cozy mysteries. Whenever I read a book that deals with crime, I kind of want it to be a little bit gritty. I don't want it to be graphic or explicit, but I want it to be realistic, and crime is kind of gritty. But these are cozy mysteries, so there's not a lot of explicit gritty anything in it, but the characters are what made me enjoy these mysteries the most, especially Milo. Honestly, I think romance authors could learn a great deal from Milo. He manages to be like seductive and suave without being crude or anything. Like, there's no spice, but Milo is a very attractive character, and so this is also kind of a different time period. We have the 1930s, and it's a cozy mystery. The second series by Ashley Weaver is also a cozy mystery series, and that's the Electra McDonald series. The Amory Ames series are finished. The Electra McDonald ones are still ongoing, and I believe the first book is called A Peculiar Combination, and it follows Electra McDonald, who is in London during the Blitz. So this is a World War II historical cozy mystery. Electra McDonald belongs to a crime family, like a small group of housebreakers and safecrackers, and so she's very good at cracking safes. Her ability to do so draws the attention of Major Ramsey, who works for the government in like Secret Service type things. It's all hush-hush, and so he enlists Electra's help in spy work, basically, and there's not that many books in the series yet. I believe there's 4, and the 4th one just came out on May 14th. So I'm going to read it. I haven't gotten it yet, but I am going to read it, and there's a romantic subplot between Electra and Major Ramsey that's woven through these books as well. So if you want a more cozy mystery series with a romantic subplot woven through, Ashley Weaver's books are perfect for that. Next up, we have the Below Stairs Mysteries by Jennifer Ashley. These are also Victorian, and they follow a cook named Kat Holloway as she also becomes involved in solving various mysteries. So this is another amateur detective story. It's written in first person as well, so again, Kat is limited not only by her station in life, but we as the readers are limited because we only know what she knows. Sometimes I felt like the mysteries kind of suffered for this, like there wasn't much necessarily to the mysteries themselves, but this is kind of more along the lines of you get to know these characters, you like them, and you get to come back and spend time with them with each new release. There's also a romantic subplot woven through this series with Daniel McAdam, who is a kind of a jack-of-all-trades character that Kat knows, and he helps her with the various mysteries that they get involved in. It has quite a colorful cast of characters, to be honest, and I do like the characterization. I think it's fun. I think it's good. It's a fun, enjoyable time whenever you get to go back and spend more time with the characters, and aside from the mysteries themselves, that's honestly half the fun. is spending time with the characters. And I believe, last but not least, we have the Harriet Gordon mystery series by A.M. Stewart. There are currently 4 books in this series, if I remember correctly, and book 1 is Singapore Sapphire. So from the title, you might guess that this mystery series does not take place in England at all, and it doesn't. It takes place in Singapore in 1910. So this is like Edwardian Singapore. Now, obviously the English were in Singapore, so you have English characters, but they're not in the typical English setting, which I found really interesting. This admittedly is not my most favorite mystery series, but it is one that I continue to read each new installment as it comes out, and it's certainly interesting to see a mystery, a historical mystery, not in the traditional Victorian England setting. So if that's what you're looking for something a little bit different, I highly recommend that series. It follows Harriet Gordon. Her brother works at a nearby school, and so does she, and then she ends up meeting Inspector Robert Curran of the police, and again, there's a romantic subplot. These are kind of cozy mysteries. I'd say they're slightly less cozy perhaps than the Ashley Weaver ones, but again, it's a cozy amateur sleuth type mystery with a romantic subplot. So if you're looking for those, I think you have quite the variety to choose from after this. So hopefully there's something here that will appeal to everybody no matter what kind of historical mystery they're looking for. I'm always looking out for more historical mysteries because it's one of my favorite genres along with fantasy, so if you have any that you would like to recommend, you can leave those in the comments below. And if you've read any of these books that I've mentioned in this video, mention that as well and let me know what you thought of them. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed and found this video useful. If you enjoyed, feel free to leave a like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future content. My name is Rachel Terry. I am the author of 3 young adult fantasy books, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!